Welcome back to Silicon Wafers. In today's episode, we turn our focus to the Eastern Front and try to tease out the truth from the tangled narratives emerging from the Battle of Pokrovsk. This is a grinding struggle that seems to be entering its final stages, but the ever-shifting balance of the fight seems to be as much about controlling the narrative as it is about occupying territory. We're zeroing in on the contested city of Pokrovsk in Donetsk Oblast, still under Ukrainian control, but also still under relentless Russian pressure. And we'll cover the neglected frontline as well in the neighbouring Zaporizhzhia Oblast, which is simultaneously seeing a push by Moscow's forces. These two theatres of conflict matter because while all eyes are drawn to Pokrovsk, where Russia hopes to punch a breakthrough and Ukraine hopes to hold the line, Moscow is quietly advancing elsewhere, threatening to exploit the distraction. What then counts as victory for Russia when so much manpower and materiel is being expended to lay claim to a city that has essentially been reduced to rubble? In a way of attrition, one side can claim any kind of victory when the price of defence is so high and the cost of attack so monstrously and irrationally large. Over the next three segments, we'll walk through, one, the state of play in Pokrovsk, two, the broader dynamic of Russia's offensive in Zaporizhzhia, and three, the question of cost, meaning, and strategy. What is Russia trying to achieve, and is Ukraine's defence sustainable? Pokrovsk not encircled yet. For months, Pokrovsk, a town in western Donetsk Oblast, has been described as Russia's next big target, the gateway to Donetsk for Moscow's advance and a high-stakes objective. But the latest reporting from Ukrainian Commander-in-Chief Alexander Syrsky makes clear that despite the danger, Ukraine rejects the narrative of encirclement or collapse. According to the Kiev Independent, Syrsky said there is no talk of Russian control over the city of Pokrovsk or operational encirclement of the Defense Forces grouping. That's from 11th November, the Moscow Times. He added that Ukrainian units had cleared 7.4 square kilometers of Russian sabotage and reconnaissance groups in the Pokrovsk district in the past week. That's from the Kiev Independent. Yet the same article also says the Pokrovsk sector remains the main axis of Russia's offensive, with intense fighting continuing on both the outskirts and within the city itself. Well, that's November 13th today from the New Voice of Ukraine. From the same analysis piece in the Kiev Independent quoted earlier, we also take this. Over the autumn, Russian troops have closed the distance to less than 15 kilometers from Pokrovsk, bringing a key logistical hub into range of first-person view FPV drones. Why does Pokrovsk matter so much? According to multiple reports, including from Le Monde, Pokrovsk, a vital city in Ukraine's Donetsk region, has entered a critical phase as Russian forces advance from the north, the east, and the south. That was from 6th of November in Le Monde. It's a logistics and railway hub, a pivot point for Ukrainian supply lines, and a potential springboard for Russia to advance further westward if that city is captured. However, capturing rubble is not the same as strategic gain, which raises the question, when does Russia get victory here? And is the loss of Pokrovsk such a strategic loss for Ukraine and such a great gain for Russia? The battle to take it has been going on for 21 months. Pokrovsk was a transit hub and a logistics intersection, but Ukraine has had a long time to divert supply routes and strengthen alternative logistic corridors, as well as fortified territory outside of Pokrovsk suburbs. It's no longer the prize that Russia imagines, and they'd have to take significant further territories, sustaining vast losses to seriously challenge vital transport routes that are now far away from this city, potentially facing years of further grinding fighting to take equivalent-sized towns. Syrsky has emphasized that supply routes remain open. Pokrovsk and the neighbouring town of Mirnogorod were not surrounded or blocked, he said, and we are doing everything we can to maintain logistics. 2nd of November, The Guardian. From various sources and commentator insights, it seems that Ukraine is attempting a defensive stabilization, redeploying units, using urban ground fighting advantages, and relying on supply corridors that are still intact. For Russia, the challenge remains how to turn this pressure into a breakthrough when urban combat is notoriously expensive and slow traditionally, and rendered catastrophically difficult in the drone age of battlefield transparency. Let's close this segment with a frontline voice. According to reports in Le Monde, the city is still standing. Hundreds of buildings, even those seriously damaged, have provided protection from projectiles. Urban combat is generally far costlier for the attacker than for the defender, and could theoretically last for months, says Le Monde. Pokrovsk dominates headlines, but it's not the only pressure point. Moscow is simultaneously advancing in Zaporizhzhia Oblast, where Ukraine has just made tactical withdrawals, and that is our next focus. Zaporizhzhia, the quiet but inexorable push. In the southeast, in Zaporizhzhia Oblast, a region annexed by Russia in 2022, though still contested, the Russian offensive is not dramatic, it is not sensational or fully splashed across media headlines, and it is not on the same large scale as Pokrovsk yet. It is steady, it is quiet, it is creeping, and it is dangerous as well. According to a recent piece by the Kiev Independent, Ukrainian forces withdrew late on 11th November from the village of Rivnopilya in the northeastern Zaporizhzhia Oblast. Ukrainian forces withdrew from its positions near the village of Rivnopilya to more defensible positions to safeguard the lives of their personnel. That's according to the Southern Defense Forces, and that statement was made on 11th of November 2025 in the Kiev Independent. More broadly, Ukraine's Southern Defense Forces spokesperson Vladislav Voloshin said, "We have completely withdrawn from Uspianivka and Novomikhailivka. Very fierce fighting continues for Yablokove and 3 or 4 other locations. The defensive operation is ongoing and the contact line remains quite dynamic," again from the same article on 11th of November. Ukraine is withdrawing under pressure and attrition. Units are under heavy fire. Numbers of artillery rounds daily exceed 400 in some of the sectors. See the Ukrinform note that more than 400 artillery attacks a day across that front are in place, potentially using up to 2,000 individual munitions. The Russian army overran these settlements in the southern Zaporizhzhia region. Ukrainian units are locked in grueling battles to repel the Russian threat. That's from the Independent, 13th of November. We see Russia choosing a broad secondary axis of attack, not as dramatic as Pokrovsk, but potentially more sustainable. If Moscow can push slowly here, it may threaten key Ukrainian supply nodes and force reserves to be drawn away from Donetsk. And why does Zaporizhzhia matter strategically? Because it links to the Dnieper River defense line. It touches the route to Kherson and the Black Sea coastline, and because any gap here gives Russia space to exploit. According to a Yahoo News piece, if Ukraine does not address these gaps, Russian forces may push further west, not only moving closer to Zaporizhzhia, but also risking the Dnieper River defense line. While the spotlight is on Pokrovsk, this flank is under pressure. Ukraine must decide, does it hold every metre here, or does it trade ground for time and manpower? In effect, Ukraine may be choosing to cede less defensible ground in Zaporizhzhia to preserve troops for the more urgent defense of Donetsk. It is one of the classic economy of force dilemmas that Ukraine has been facing over these long, almost 4 years of war. Here is General Syrsky again. The Pokrovsk sector remains the main axis of Russia's offensive with intense fighting. That's from New Voice of Ukraine. Well, let's turn to the last segment of this episode, victory strategy and the rubble of Pokrovsk. Here we come to the heart of the matter. What counts as victory, especially for Russia? The assault on Pokrovsk has been going on for more than a year, nearly 2 years. Moscow is expending manpower, firepower, and resources. But the city is devastated, described in Le Monde as a largely deserted wasteland. If Russia takes Pokrovsk, what does that give them? a ruined city. A weakened Ukrainian foothold, yes, but they are not dramatically closer to their targets of seizing 4 full oblasts of Ukraine. In fact, they are still far, far away from that objective. So it is a symbolic victory, yes, but the strategic and logistical worth of it, well, minimal compared to the cost. However, we must remember our calculation of costs in economic and human terms is nothing like the calculations being made in the Kremlin. USA Today and Associated Press reporting suggests a broader context here. Russian forces have captured 3 settlements in Ukraine's southern Zaporizhzhia region. Russia launched its full-scale invasion and now occupies roughly 1/5 of Ukrainian land. But we also have to remember it's only 1 to 2% more of Ukraine than they occupied at the start of the full-scale war. In traditional military terms, that cannot be counted as a victory. In fact, I would suggest, given that more than 1 million Russians are dead, it is an extraordinary defeat on a historic scale. Well, let's close with 3 observations. 1, Russia's objectives appear incremental at the moment rather than massive rapid breakthroughs. Russia seems to accept attrition in service of steady advance and inflicting costs on Ukraine. Pokrovsk may be a millstone, but one that bleeds Ukraine in manpower and morale from Russia's point of view. At least that's what they are hoping. Point 2, Ukraine's objective is to hold critical nodes in the Donetsk and Zaporizhzhia Oblast to preserve military reserves and slow Russia's momentum until the winter logistics window closes. The withdrawals in Zaporizhzhia show the difficult choices, trading ground to save lives and attrit the enemy's strength. Point 3, the meaning of victory for Russia may be shifting. If Russia captures Pokrovsk, it gets a propaganda victory that is far greater than its strategic value. But if Ukraine retreats, it is not lost in the classical sense, because holding that city for 21 months to attrit Russia was perhaps the point of the fight. Well, we've seen that Pokrovsk remains contested, not yet encircled, yet under intense pressure. We've seen that Russia's broader push into Zaporizhzhia is steady and alarming. And finally, we've asked the key question: what is victory in this war when cities are reduced to rubble and have little economic value after Russia has taken them? Well, it tells us something about Russia's real objectives, and it's not territory, but the very process of ethnic cleansing and economic sterility. Russia now wants eastern Ukraine to become a wasteland, denuded of people, with a basket case economy. This is the point now: erasure, not domination.
Бажаємо міцного здоров'я. Ми бійці батальйону безпілотних систем Black Raven 93-ї бригади Холодний Яр виконуємо бойове завдання на Константинівському напрямку в Донецькій області. Для їх успішного виконання наш підрозділ має потребу в пікапах для виїзду особового складу на позиції, евакуації, своєчасного підвозу боєприпасів, дронів та обладнання в район ведення бойових дій. Звертаємося до YouTube-спільноти Silicon Curtain та Джонатана особисто з проханням допомогти підтримати збір, а також до Car for Ukraine та Бандера Мобіль з проханням допомогти з купівлею, підготовкою та доставкою авто на фронт. Слава Україні!
Героям слава!